Hello race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome to Above the Yellow Line. Right now you are on part 1 of a 2-part special episode with special contributor Zachary Bell here at Above the Yellow Line. This episode we are going to be talking about the Toyota SaveMart 350 at Sonoma Raceway. We're going to break down the top 10, outside the top 10 with some positives and negatives, and then we're going to go into our race ratings. We're also going to talk about a little bit of breaking news regarding Matt DiBenedetto and a crew chief change. We're also going to be talking about some rules changes with the super speedway packages and the road course packages for rain days that were just announced this week by NASCAR. So without further ado, let's get to it. Hello race fans, my name is Taylor and welcome back to Above the Yellow Line, the show where we talk all about the NASCAR Cup Series. Today, we're introducing a new format, a little bit of everything, a post-race, a pre-race, some updates, and I'm doing it with my friend and special contributor, I got the title right, Zachary Bell. How are you, Zach?
I'm good. I'm ready for my promotion to co-host. Official co-host. Somebody needs to start sending me some paychecks over here because I am much in need.
Honestly, me too. So, I mean, volunteer work. Put this down as your volunteer work, I guess. But I'm so glad to have you back. We're going to be talking about the Texas All-Star race. We have a lot of opinions there, a lot of updates. Today, we're also going to be doing a post-race discussion on the Toyota SaveMart 350 at Sonoma, just discussing it a little bit before we dive into everything else. So to begin, let's start by showing the lineup for the event this past weekend with Kyle Larson on the pole and with Heckert and Alfredo sent to the rear. And then we have the finishing results. Nothing special. Nothing that we didn't all expect. Our top 3 drivers were, in my opinion, the top 3 road course drivers we have today in the sport. Kyle Larson ended up where he started, position number 1. Then we have Chase Elliott and then Martin Truex Jr., who started the race 19th, but then moved his way through the field to the top by the middle, if not even earlier, of the first stage. So, and those restarts were so exciting towards the end of the race. They were on the edge of my seat. You didn't know if Elliott was going to beat Larson. You didn't know if Truex was going to catch up, but Zach, do you want to mention anything about these top 3? And following up on Larson, we know he's so good. We know he's maybe unbeatable. What is it going to take to beat him if that's possible?
You know, I don't think Kyle Larson is some unbeatable force. It's been an impressive few weeks, right? Like past month or so, month and a half. I don't think he's unbeatable. He's, not a perfect race car driver. Of course, nobody is, right?
Nobody's perfect.
I mean, this is a standout victory, but I'm really not too concerned. I'm going to sound like the hypocrite of the group, but everybody's like, oh, Kyle Larson, but really, he's winning at tracks that aren't relevant for the playoffs. He's winning at tracks that aren't relevant for the championship. This only gets you so far. This is the same thing we saw Kevin Harvick do last year. And where did he get, right? 5th in the standings and a big fat good effort. So I'm not ready to crown him anything. I'll crown him in the round of 8. How about that? He's a round of 8 for me.
Interesting. I'm excited to talk playoffs when they happen because hopefully we'll have an episode where I have a few of our guests on and we'll do a bracket. Already can assume what your bracket's going to look like, Zach. We won't get into that right now. But yeah, Kyle Larson's a wild card this year, a little bit of a wild card. We expect him to do well, but how far can he make it is the question. Me personally, he is unbeatable in the sense that he's very good. He's going to be good unless his car obviously is not in the right setup or maybe an accident or something. We expect him to do well. I think there are contenders that can beat him. Obviously, Chase Elliott and him duked it out this time, and I think Chase Elliott is going to be a contender for him. Kyle Busch breaking up the Hendrick Brigade here, definitely a contender. Those JGR cars, I think with Hendrick Motorsports are going to be the main battle we see the rest of the season. I could be wrong. We still have a lot of racing to go, but let's talk about the rest of this top 10. We had Logano in 4th, Kyle Busch in 5th, Kurt Busch in 6th, 7th was Ross Chastain, 8th is Denny Hamlin, 9th is Alex Bowman, and 10th is Ryan Blaney. And I want to ask you, Zach, I want you to pick one driver that stands out to you in this top 10 and kind of discuss why.
I'll take Kyle Busch. That 18 car was a little bit beaten and battered at the end of the day. He was good on that, but beaten and battered, drives it all the way, back up into the top 5. I just, I know after everything we saw from Kyle Busch last year, I know a lot of us are down on him a little bit and more down than we should be, but I've been so impressed with him pretty much ever since that win at Kansas. He's looked really good. A few races, a few moments he did not look good at Dover, for example, but These last three races, he's looked really, really fantastic. Just a big momentum here, and to me, he's not that far off. And he's evolving into maybe the championship favorite from Gibbs.
I would agree with you, actually. I think if we consider the rest of the field, and we all, it's no secret, mentioning this before, mentioning it again, Hendrick Motorsports is on a hot streak. The only driver that really consistently has been able to contend and keep up with them through the past few weeks has been Kyle Busch. So I would agree with you, Zach. I think he is the championship favorite over at Joe Gibbs Racing for sure. I would say the driver I would pick, and I would say the driver, so I'm gonna cheat on my own question a little bit, but I would say the team of Chip Ganassi Racing. We saw Kurt Busch and Ross Chastain perform very well. It is no secret that they are decent road course racers. Kurt Busch, obviously, we expect him to do well at the road courses. But together, I was pretty impressed. They didn't have issues all day. There was nothing they really had to overcome that I'm recalling. They had a solid points day, I think. Kurt Busch is, I believe, on the outside looking in on points right now. Is that correct, Zach?
Yes, he's 18th, 63 out.
Okay. And that's tough to make up. That is tough. Probably a win scenario. But if points count, which they will count, we have Denny Hamlin leading in points or almost close to leading in points. Definitely nice at the end of the day that you had those crucial stage points, those crucial finishes. So a good day for the Chip Ganassi Racing team. So that is inside the top 10. Let's take it outside the top 10. We're going to look at a driver that did not do well and a driver that did do well. So Zach, I want to ask you about your driver that you think was pretty successful this weekend.
It's Bubba Wallace. We give him a lot of crap for being a bad road course racer. He openly talks about it, but the man blew a tire and was pinned in the 30s like all race long. He did have some luck here, being the only car one lap down, so he got his lap back. He also lucked into the fact that there's a bunch of late cautions that made things a little funky. But I saw Bubba early in the race running in the top 15 or so, top 20. It's not like he wasn't good enough to be there. And this is a big race for them, right? Like we haven't seen too many top 15s out of this team. MJ was at the track, so that makes it even more important, right?
Exactly.
He definitely looked to step off of like Denny Hamlin for his owner, but his car owner. But a really good day when you consider what we think of Bubba Wallace on road courses. I would usually consider a top 25 a good day for old Bubba, but top 15's fantastic. Might as well have won the race in my book.
He did break into the top 10 at one point. I don't want to say like he has the top 10 curse, but every time I feel like he breaks into the top 10, something happens, whether it's a penalty or something happens with the car. But yes, he was a driver that did impress me. Michael Jordan was there. It was a star-studded event. Guy Fieri was he drove the pace car. Fun day. The guy I think did well, though. I think someone we can't ignore, and I barely talked about on my show, and I feel horrible for not doing this, but Eric Jones, he was in the top 10. He finished 11th. Like, my goodness, Eric Jones, he was taken out of the Joe Gibbs car into the Richard Petty car. They only mentioned him on the broadcast maybe once or twice, and I thought they didn't really give him credit where credit was due. We don't see him doing significantly at road courses, so he was someone that definitely impressed me on Sunday. I want to move on because we talked about the positives. Let's talk about the negatives. Who was a driver that you were pretty disappointed by this weekend?
Matt DiBenedetto. In 2019, when NASCAR was last at Sonoma, the Cup Series, he finished in the top 5 in a significantly lesser Levine family racing car. It was lesser than the Levine family racing car that Christopher Bell drove last year, and it's significantly lesser than that 21 car he drives now. And so I had, high expectations of a top 10, right? Like, he was a really good road course racer in 2019, and he has not been anywhere close to that since he's gotten to that 21 car. And, accordingly, the team ended up firing Greg Irwin, who is the problem on the pit box. Obviously he's not going to be the guy. Obviously he's not the guy driving the race car, but like Greg Irwin's been a problem for a while with this 21 car, it feels like. But back to Matt DiBenedetto himself. It's just a really disappointing run. Like, he's been outside the top 18 the last like 5 races. Like, are you kidding me? There's tracks in here where you think you can make up some ground. Road courses, right? I mean, the Coke 600, you could have, just a lot of questions over there for him.
Yeah, and because I mentioned the hot streak he was on at the beginning of the season, he was finishing better and better each week, and then all of a sudden it just dissipated. And I do want to go into this crew chief change though. So talking about maybe what this means for the team, and you could see this many different ways, but mentioning that Matt DiBenedetto's crew chief, the Penske engineer Jonathan Hassler is taking over for the spot. In my view, what this means for me is either they're planning for next year with a new driver, or they want to continue with Matt DiBenedetto, get him a new crew chief, because to me it logically doesn't make sense to change a crew chief in the middle of the season and then have a new driver in the car. That's like too much learning for the team. That's too much picking up the pace. Zach, can you kind of theorize a little bit, if you can, like what do you think this means?
I don't think this bodes well for Matt DiBenedetto. It doesn't necessarily kick him out of the car, but like his ice that he's on is so thin. Like
Yeah.
a piece of paper, I write show notes on from my show is probably thicker than that piece of ice he's standing on. And like
Oh man.
yeah, it's a burn, but like really think about it. You should recognize like how good that 21 car is. Like think about it, if you put like Austin Cindric in that 21 car next year, that guy's for sure making the playoffs, right? That
Absolutely.
guy's probably winning a race. He's at least close. So, I mean, something's got a lot of fire in him, because like I'm concerned. Like I take it as like he's on his last leg, but I've thought he's been on his last leg since last year. So maybe I don't know. But I take it as like this is his last chance. But it also, to me, it also signifies that they're giving up on 2021. Like, the last driver that made a crew chief change in the middle of a championship hunt, or like in the middle of fighting for the playoffs, that I can remember, was Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
When he switched from, I can't even remember the dude's name. Is it Mendering? I think it's like Kevin Mendering, I think, or Jeff Mendering, one of the two. There's the Mendering brothers, and the other
Yes.
brother is crew chief for Brandon Jones in the Xfinity Series. The other Mendering was a crew chief for Jimmy, and then they went to Cliff Daniels, and that was all about developing Cliff Daniels for what would eventually become Kyle Larson. So
Correct.
think like, is Matt DiBenedetto here to develop crew chief for Austin Cindric or some other driver we don't think of, or is it just to start building chemistry for 2022? But it certainly feels like that this is kind of like taking them out of the championship hunt for me for this year. That's the biggest takeaway.
I would have to agree with that part of it. I think this change really does take them out of the championship hunt. I mean, they could get lucky, they could really click really fast, but I don't see that being the case. With this change though, it's happening this coming weekend for the All-Star race. And if you're gonna make a change, it has to be now or never, because this is not a points race. So if you really, I mean, you either fight for the $1 million, which I know they're gonna try to do, like if it's not a points race, this is the time to make a change, because you have time before we go to next week at Nashville to learn about each other a little bit, connect as a team. So too little too late, I think, for Matt DiBenedetto, as you were saying, Zach. But
this is a good time to change, and you make a good point, right? You got the All-Star race this week, and then you got a trip to Nashville, and then what's after Nashville? The trip to Road America, right? Or is there something in? All right, so Pocono, you don't have practice at Pocono, but you're gonna have practice at Road America. You're gonna have practice at Nashville. The All-Star race is essentially a glorified test session. So it's really quite like a good time. If you're gonna make it, here's a chance. NASCAR, without practice, you really don't have time to build chemistry. And of course, NASCAR doesn't really throw in bye weeks like it's the NFL. It's not a thing we get all the time.
right.
So
moral of the story: if we're going to make a change, you make it now. Speaking of the negatives of that, kind of the impact of that, I would have to say my driver, who I kind of feel like had a negative weekend. I hate to harp on Brad Keselowski here, but he this past few weeks has kind of been underperforming his teammates a little bit. I mentioned this on another podcast I was on, that Brad Keselowski was my pick to not do well this weekend, and unfortunately it happened. Now, Brad Keselowski finished in 15th. His teammates Blaney and Logano, Blaney finished 10th, and then Logano finished in 5th. But Brad Keselowski was the first Ford that was the first Ford finishing position out. That was not inside the top 10. So to me, as a whole, that is concerning for the whole Ford organization. They seem to be slacking a little bit, and I'm not sure where that slack is coming from, what's happening, or if even the Chevys are just kind of.
It's
Stewart Haas.
The dead weight is Stewart Haas, right? If you think of it, right, like Chevy has like one, maybe two good teams, right? Toyota is its own conglomerate. Okay, like I don't consider them to be two teams. It's one team plus Bubba Wallace. So this might as well just be a 5-car team. And then you have the Fords and you have the three Penske guys who are running well, right? Brad is a bit inconsistent, but Blaney and Logano have run well all season, it feels like. And it's just like Kevin Harvick's run really relatively well, but not winning. But outside of them, like it's it, you know. The rest of Stuart Haas isn't there. Roush is kind of there with Chris Buescher, like
It's very
floating around.
wishy-washy.
You know, like all 400 cars will look great this year, right?
Yeah. And so
Both
I guess
RCR
I
cars
want
are
to,
impressed. So I just feel like there's like somebody's got to pick up the slack, and it's got to come from Stuart Haas because I don't think like Roush is capable of it with the resources they have, or any other Ford team really. Like it's kind of down to Stuart Haas to make that Ford to Chevrolet and Toyota gap smaller.
because the gap is quite large. And I was questioning in my brain, we saw Chevrolet maybe 2017. I mean, these past 2 years until I think this year, really, them struggling a little bit, especially when they made that car change. They struggled a lot. And we were like, when are the Chevys going to come back? Where are the bow ties? And here we are. And I don't know if it's an increase in potential and ability with the Chevys, and it's now like all the changes are playing out. But I would agree again that Stewart Haas Racing has a little bit of slack to pick up. But I want to kind of close out this discussion now by talking about the stage racing that we saw this weekend. The hot topic, I would say, on Twitter, social media, for the road course races, Sonoma, was should NASCAR keep stage races for road courses? We have 7 road courses on the schedule. We're going to have to start seeing some format consistency with this. So my question to you, Zach, before we go into our race ratings, is do you think that NASCAR should be keeping these stages in the road course races? And if not, why?
Well, my opinion is they should not have stages in road course racing. But my overall grand arching opinion that trumps that is consistency from race to race, from track to track. If you want stages at Atlanta, you want stages at Charlotte, if you want stages at Talladega and stages at Bristol, you need to have stages on the road courses. That is my opinion. I'd rather them have no stages at all, but if we're going to have stages, have them everywhere, and they all need to be the same. You can't be like, oh, well, at this track, we're going to have stage breaks to create more action. But then like, oh, at Talladega and Daytona, because this is a similar conversation we have there, is you don't want to break up the action by having a stage break, right? No. Consistency. NASCAR's biggest consistency is they're consistently inconsistent.
We love that, don't we?
This is one of my biggest complaints about them in general, and we'll touch on another one here in a little bit. But no, you need to be consistent. Or yes, you need stages to be consistent with the rest of the schedule, and you need stage breaks to be consistent with the rest of the schedule.
And that was part of my argument I was going to make with this. Giving my kind of 2 cents on this is, the lack of consistency, I think, with NASCAR and the rules, and for me personally too, when we changed the rules in the middle of the race, like the Bristol dirt race in particular, the road course race COTA, it kind of, yes, for me, it invalidates the winner and invalidates the race in general. If you change up the rules, it could affect a driver who was doing really well, make them do poorly. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But for me, it invalidates the race as a whole. And if you have rules at road courses that are not at a regular oval track, too, I also feel like it invalidates the process. Obviously, there are different tracks. They have different drivability, different packages. I understand that. But I would say kind of make consistency. And my argument, too, with this, another argument I heard on social media that I actually liked, is don't do the stage breaks, keep the stages for point purposes, but keep the race going. And then we know with road courses in particular, pit strategy plays out big time. That is what makes or breaks a race, pretty much. So if you keep those stage breaks just for points, not having a caution or anything, I think that would be more beneficial, I think, if we want to do the stage format, than it would be to eliminate them altogether. For me, that's a pretty good argument, just because the runs at road courses are so short. You have maybe like 20 laps on tires or fuel, something like that. And it's just not, it just breaks the flow of the race. It breaks the likability of watching the race too. So that's kind of my view on the stages of road courses here. We have Zach and I varying opinions on it. Let us know in the comments below what you think. I know it is a hot topic for debate. And now the time has come, Zach, that we're going to rate this race above or below the yellow line. Obviously, 50 is on the line, above is good, below is bad. I don't think we have a very negative view on this race, but Zach, I want you to rate this race for me here. What was your pick?
It's 70%. Like, it's a decent NASCAR race, right?
Yeah.
And this race gets elevated by the calamity at the end with the cautions. What could have been. This is the best Sonoma race, in my opinion, since probably 2016 when Tony Stewart beat Denny Hamlin. Sadly, but I mean,
A little bit of heartbreak.
Like, a little bit. I was like, I hate that race was so good because it ends in such heartbreak for me and Denny Hamlin, for a team. But like, of course, it was a good race. Like, I don't know, races for me, like on your level, that like when they go below the 50%, it's races where I feel like I wasted my time watching the race. That's kind of like where how part of I've explained my logic for rating your races before.
Yes.
But like, this is one where like I was pretty invested in it, and it was above the average Sonoma race, but I have low expectations for Sonoma.
Right. I would say my remembering skills are not great. I mentioned this on the show many times before. I do remember Sonoma in 2018. This race, to me, though, I actually enjoyed it. It was average for me, but it was slightly above average. So I'm going to give this race a 65%. Surprisingly and shockingly to me, something else I cannot believe I'm saying, as I've said many of those things, I think this past week when I talked about the Chicago street course and how I actually kind of want to see that happen, another discussion for another day. But I'm actually starting to like road course racing now. I used to kind of dread it, but I think it involves a lot of action, a lot of passing. There's always something to watch. And the packages we're running now at the oval courses that we have, the 1.5 miles, the short tracks, for me just isn't doing it. And I hope with the next gen cars, maybe some of that can change. But I thought it was pretty entertaining. And as Zach mentioned, the final restarts and the caution at the end did make the intensity a lot more intense and increase the intensity. And for me, that was fun to watch. At the end, I didn't know if Chase Elliott was going to beat Kyle Larson, and then if Martin Truex was going to catch up in the top, like I mentioned, in the top 10. So for me, that is why I give it a 65%, because it was like average, but then at the end, it got pretty exciting.
NASCAR, in my opinion, has kind of forced us to like road course racing, right? Because like it used to be a novelty.
Yes.
In my day, it used to be just 2 road course races, and you're like, oh, boohoo! It's like a Jeff Gordon win, it's a Tony Stewart win, or it's a Kyle Busch win, is what it evolved into, or Martin Truex win, right? Like those are the guys you thought of. And as they've added more road courses, like you appreciate the strategy. Like you don't, people flip this race, right? Like I watch guys grocery games, and all the time they play this game called Flip This Dish. And road courses and it's like flip this race, and this is what they do. They and it gives teams choices. The thing about the stages, to go back, is when you stop for stage points, you have the choice to race for stage points or to race for a better starting spot in the next stage, and to better position yourself to short pit stage 2 to start out in front in stage 3. So these things, and then more road course races combined with, I'm not saying NASCAR intentionally makes a bad 550 or mile and a half package, right? Or 2 mile track or whatever. But with how bad it is and how bad it can get sometimes, I'm looking at you, Texas. I'm looking at you, Atlanta, Charlotte. But like, you kind of have to like the road course racing in a way to be a fan. Like, if you don't like the ovals, right? If you don't like the intermediate tracks, all you're living for is the once in a blue moon trip to Daytona and Talladega, the short tracks, which really is just Martinsville and Bristol at this point because Richmond's not there anymore, and the road courses. That's like 15 races, 10 races, so like 12 races actually. I think I'm doing the math. 12-ish races you live for. That's 1/3 of the schedule. So.
And I think the more we're seeing the road course races, I think we're getting more opinions. NASCAR's learning more about, especially the rain conditions, what we're going to be talking about in a second, what to do with that. I will say the thing I like about this is I definitely am a sucker for strategy. I love, and I'm on the edge of my seat seeing things play out. If hitting 2 laps ahead of the leader is going to change something. And I think with this race in particular, or road courses especially, what draws me in, and I think a lot of fans in, is strategy going to work? Is this team's strategy going to outlast this one? We saw that at COTA, whether you agree with it or not, we saw Chase Elliott continue to stay out when he had a different strategy.
And bet on the rain.
And he bet on the rain, right. So you're betting on the
valid strategy. That's a
Right.
valid strategy.
So, and I would absolutely valid. So you are outwitting and almost like Survivor. It's outwit, outlast, outsmart, whatever. I'm a Survivor fan, but it's almost like that at the road courses, and I think that is very, very enjoyable. So that is our ratings. That is our take on Sonoma. Now we have to move on to some announcements, some rule changes that we need to talk about for the road course races and for the super speedway races announced Tuesday. Speaking of road courses, NASCAR announced that they are changing their super speedway packages for future races and they're changing their road course rules. And so they announced the following in effect on our next super speedway race, that the cars will be 7 to 10 miles per hour slower with added adjustments. I know William Byron in a post-race interview after Talladega, I believe, talked about maybe slowing the cars down could help with safety. We have smaller tapered spacers. What they are, to kind of explain it here, is they provide better air distribution and reduce the engine's horsepower. And basically what they are is they're similar, very similar to restrictor plates, but what they are is they have holes in them that are kind of like cone shape. So that's what makes them a little bit different. I have the image up on the screen to kind of compare the two. And then also something else that's different is they have no wicker on the spoilers, and the wicker creates downforce on the backside of the car, so they don't have a lot of that. And then what that is the spoiler sticks up, and the wicker is like the clear part on top, which I also have an image of there. And I think, at least for me, it's important to have the visuals and understand what the rule changes actually are, in my opinion. So as a newer fan getting into the sport, I know what's up. And how it affects the cars, which is also how you can see the racing be affected. The final change for these super speedway races is the optional reinforced roll bar that is by the wheel is now mandatory as a safety concern. We saw Joey Logano's wreck. Zach, you remember Joey Logano's wreck? It was pretty scary. It was scary for me to watch. They investigated that, and these are the changes they found fit. Now, before we discuss this, I want to mention the road course change as well that they talked about. For the Cup Series cars and the Xfinity cars, they are making it mandatory, a required 2 flashing brake lights on the back of the car for rain races in particular. This is for rain races. Lots of changes, lots of words up on the screen for you. But Zach, I want to ask you, what do you make of these changes? I know we talked kind of before the show. There's some positives, I think, and some negatives with this. What are your thoughts?
Let's break these down into two parts between the super speedways and the road courses. So the super
Yes,
speedway is all in the name of safety. And
absolutely.
I am going to be very critical of NASCAR here. I am very much so stuck in this opinion, and I will not be changed on it. NASCAR's definition of safety is different than mine and yours, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Our definition of safety is drivers not getting injured at all, correct?
Yes.
I would argue NASCAR's definition of safety is life and death. Do you know, we talk about NASCAR safety and we never like, oh, nobody's been hurt since 2001, right? We're like, nobody's died in a NASCAR crash since Dale Earnhardt in 01, which is phenomenal. So to me, when I think about this, I see NASCAR is making a further step in looking at the general safety of drivers. Because there's no doubt in my mind, Joey Logano, there's some sort of residual effect of that crash, right? I mean, he's flopping around in this car, he's floating in the air, you know.
When the roof caved in on him.
Right, exactly. So there's probably some sort of contact there between his helmet and his head, you know. And sure, maybe it works, like it's safe, but like you could just easily prevent that crash, right? Like now my concern is we've seen NASCAR try to slow these cars down. This is what they did in Talladega in 2019, I think, when they
Yes.
originally introduced the Wicker bill and they were going like 212. They're like, oh, this is way too fast. Part of the problem, and older drivers will tell you this, is it's because you're slowing the speeds down, it doesn't necessarily make it safer. It just brings them closer together. Close racing is what causes these wrecks, right? It's
Yes.
guys get big runs and a close pack, and someone, tries to make a late block. Someone tries to make an aggressive move, and it turns someone else, right? That's what always happens, it feels like. So for me, for NASCAR, safety won't really actually come to these races until either they actually unrestrict these cars to an extent and just let them, have it on the more of the mechanical side, raw speed sort of side, or if they have a change in the driver mentality. None of these, only one person left has raced with Dale Earnhardt, and that was Kurt Busch. It's, and Kevin Harvick, obviously replaces Dale Earnhardt, so I guess you can kind of include him in that conversation. But really, nobody else has had much of a thought about this in their career. Even someone as old as veteran as Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch probably really weren't thinking about it too much.
And I want to bounce off your comment on the driver mentality real quick. I also say the fan mentality is a big part of this, because we as the fans also see these super speedway races, Daytona and Talladega, as wild card races. Anyone can win. There's always chaos. You expect the guy that's there last, who's unscathed or even is just barely able to cross the finish line, to win. So as much as the drivers are like, this is my shot to get in because it's a wild card race, it's super speedway, there's also needs to be a change in the fan mentality, how we think of it, because that does influence the drivers. It influences NASCAR and the sport and the decisions they make based on the fan reaction. So that's just a comment I wanted to make real quick about the kind of expectations.
As to transition to the road courses, as someone who was at COTA, the second red light won't do anything. I mean, it's like the problem was not visibility in a sense, right? They couldn't, they were not seeing, the problem was the spray off the cars. Until you answer or fix the spray off the cars, it's not going to do you much good. I mean, it's just going to be, I mean, we've all driven we've all tried to see, if you're crying and you have a little twinkle in your eye and everything, the light bends a little bit, or you're driving in the rain and the light bends a little bit off the water, right? That's still going to happen. I mean, it's a nice touch. It's a good effort. And, NASCAR really probably can't address anything with how the cars, disperse the water and stuff or spray it out until they get to the next gen car next year at the earliest. So I'm not trying to be critical of them here, but that was the problem, not the lights.
And to add on to that too, because that was part of what I was going to mention too, is the lights that's a start. Now they did rain, or I guess damp or wet condition testing at Richmond following COTA. Joey Logano was one who was very vocal about that, and he they mentioned having the tires for the playoff race, the rain tires, and Joey Logano's like, "Whoa, hold the phone here. That's great and all, but we need to make sure the drivers are safe first." Which for me, entertainment comes second. I know entertainment, NASCAR, sports, it's supposed to be fun to watch, but it's not fun to watch when the drivers and the athletes that we cheer on are not safe. So they tested at Richmond when they went. They tested different tires. They tested mud flaps. I know they think they need to change the windshield wipers. There's a lot they have to look at before these drivers are ready to go rain racing again. Zach mentioned the next gen car. There's a lot they're going to have to test with the next gen car in the rain. But the main concern for Joey Logano was, or what he talked about too, and I'll link what his interview in the description below. He talked about how the slicks really didn't give off a lot of rain. There wasn't a lot of splatter back on the windshields, but also you can't really race in slicks, right? Because they don't have grip. Now, the issue is with the tires, they have all those grooves, right? So when you're on the track, they're going to pick up the rain and scoop it back into the windshield. So it's trying to find a balance between grip and also finding a balance between what's not going to give a lot of spray off. That also, Zach was at COTA, is going to depend on how horrible the weather is. And for me, I don't know if you agree with this, Zach, but I don't think you should race when it's raining, maybe a mist. But if it's raining, maybe that's not the best idea based on what NASCAR has right now for the drivers.
For now, no. But I'm not going to sit here and act like I wasn't entertained. That was a very entertaining race. And it was
and I agree.
And, there's a bit of edginess danger and you're on, and it crossed the line. We talked about it. When that Harvick wreck happened, you're like, oh, I don't know about this. And when the Truex happened, you're like, all right, this definitely crossed the line. When NASCAR gets themselves in those sort of situations, they absolutely need to call the race. I trust them enough to call the race now. They learned their lesson. NASCAR may be slow to change, but they're not dumb and they're not ignorant to change. And so that's kind of my thought. If you feel like that's going to happen, when drivers can no longer see the car in front of them, that's the problem. If it's raining and you for some reason it's the track, you can have rain and have a good amount of rain before it becomes a problem on the track, before it collects. You could probably run a few laps, maybe even 10 depending on the size of the road course, and they would be fine. But, when it's already been raining and, you're 30 laps into a race of rain, it's time to call it or pause it.
But I think a positive to take away from this with all these updates as we move on is they are learning. Like Zach said, they're not dumb. They might be slow to learn, or they might, they did their thorough investigation with the Joey Logano crash, but they're making changes and they're going to see if they work. And unfortunately, I mentioned this in a podcast earlier, in order to know the line, sometimes you have to cross it. That's not what we like to see at all as fans, or even the drivers in this case, if we're talking NASCAR and COTA in particular. But they learn from it and are trying to make adjustments, which is also, that is the most important thing, I think. You don't know until you see it, and then you learn from it. So those are the updates that we have for now, and that was all about Sonoma. Let's move on to this weekend with the Texas All-Star Race, which Zach, I know, is very excited about. So we'll get to that. There's a lot to break down here.
Hey everyone, it's Taylor. Thank you all so much for watching this episode of Above the Yellow Line. This is part 1, and part 2 will be up shortly, covering the Texas All-Star Race. For now, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like the video, check out my Twitter, and check out the podium finish, all linked in the description below. Make sure you check those out, and as always, thank you so much for supporting the channel, and until next time, I'll see ya.